If you're a fan of Bethesda games, you'll probably know that Starfield is scheduled to release in 2023. We know a few things about it. It's an RPG set in space. There'll be, quote, more handcrafted content than any Bethesda game, but there'll also be a lot of procedurally generated locations. We know that the protagonist will not be voiced. We've also just had a video showcasing short pieces of gameplay. It's generated lots of discussion out there, but fundamentally they're all discussing many aspects of the one question: will it be a great game? Starfield isn't meant to be a one and done game. Bethesda is no doubt looking to kickstart a new franchise to match the likes of the Elder Scrolls and Fallout universes that are staples of gaming today. Many of the details we know so far talk around the metrics of the game, how long it's going to be, how big the cities are, how many lines of dialogue they've written, etc. But the one thing we haven't seen anything about is the lore of the universe, and in order to create a franchise to rival their other ones, Bethesda will need to nail this aspect. We recently saw another company with a massive RPG franchise try to branch out and recreate their success. That attempt was Cyberpunk and the company CD Projekt Red, best known for the Witcher series. The visual bugs and glitches got the most attention online, especially the ones that happened in lower spec systems. Personally, I had a fine experience with the game and I'm pretty bug tolerant. The few visual bugs I got, like cars nearby still showing the low detail models if I rode too fast, weren't game breaking by any means. While it's true that many people didn't give the game a chance after that, ultimately it's not the reason why Cyberpunk as a franchise didn't take off. When it comes to gameplay, Cyberpunk is almost a carbon copy of The Witcher. Primarily it's a game about combat, with a fairly detailed main quest to give the player direction. Most of the gameplay systems in Cyberpunk are near duplicates of what you see in The Witcher, but The Witcher grabbed people and is one of the most successful franchises in gaming history, while Cyberpunk will end with a single DLC at best. The key difference is the universe it's set in and the lore it draws on. The Witcher has demonstrated the attraction of its lore by succeeding in TV, and many people have been drawn to read the books after playing the game. People have emotional engagement with Geralt, his friends, and the rest of the universe. In contrast, and I stress that this is a subjective opinion, for a futuristic world, Cyberpunk feels old and almost retro in many ways. The lore of the game books is from the late 80s. That probably has an impact on why the world feels dated, despite being set in the future. People also didn't get a chance to get emotionally attached to the main character, V. Maybe people would have cared about Jackie Wells, but he dies in the prologue, and Johnny Silverhand is nothing but an annoying backseat driver. There's many people out there, and I'm sure some love Night City, but it's fair to say that it's failed to grab people in the same way that The Witcher did, despite having almost the same gameplay. Fundamentally, it was the lore that was lacking. Now let's look at Bethesda's current franchises. Elder Scrolls has a massive amount of world building. Skyrim was a phenomenal commercial success that it was because it was an Elder Scrolls game, with the lore and fanbase that had been amassed since the days of Daggerfall and Morrowind. If Skyrim had released without that foundation, it's unlikely that it would have been as successful as it was. The same goes for Fallout. The first Fallouts painted a canvas of a blasted 50s Americana, where people struggled to survive after nuclear devastation. Bethesda built on what Interplay had done and extended on it. While there's many old school fans that prefer the original isometric games, it's also the case that Bethesda has painted their own details into Interplay's original canvas. There's many criticisms to be levied at the gameplay of Skyrim and Fallout 4. They're not perfect games by any means, but people have spent thousands of hours on them and will spend even more playing those two games. At the end of the day, there's something comforting about hearing the same old jokes about arrows to the knee, getting sent into orbit by giants, and squealing in fear when a Deathclaw charges at your level 1 character. There's a certain emotional attachment that fans have to the staples of these franchises. That's the power of lore. Within a few days of the official gameplay footage being released, the memes are already starting. Fallout in space, No Man's Skyrim. In many ways, it's unavoidable because the vaults in the Fallout universe have that clean space station feel, and it's almost impossible not to think of the vaults when seeing footage of space stations and space cities. But memes aside, Starfield cannot have the same lore as Fallout if it wants to succeed. It must differentiate itself in order to become its own franchise. We know precious little about the rest of the lore of the universe, but we know that this will be Bethesda's biggest challenge, since they bet the company on a little dark elf province called Morrowind 20 years ago. That's not being hyperbolic. Bethesda's success since then is based on what Morrowind did for the company, and they're hoping that Starfield will do the same for the next 20 years. World building in futuristic and space franchises is very difficult to get right. Off the top of your head, how many space-based games can you think of that that have the same depth of lore that rivals what you see in the Elder Scrolls and Fallout. Mass Effect maybe? What else? Aside from your cinematic franchise games like Star Wars, most space games are about the gameplay more than the lore. You have your colony building sims where alien planets present a variety of challenges. You have your spaceflight sims where you fly your ship to trade and engage in space combat. You have your RTS games where you manage a fleet of space vessels. Take any game set in space and you'll think of them in terms of their gameplay first and foremost. Lore will be a distant second at best. Bethesda in many ways has been resting on their creative laurels for a long time now, and releasing games that simply draw from world building done decades ago. When it comes to Starfield, Bethesda has had enough time to come up with a lore based on engage fans. But we'll have to wait and see until the game is released to see whether enough time and effort has been spent on building that lore to a sufficient level for Starfield to become a successful franchise. Very few franchises take off immediately. In most cases, it takes several installments in a franchise to build a critical base of hardcore fans that allows the franchise to snowball. As mentioned previously, the first games of Bethesda's own Elder Scrolls and Fallout franchises weren't massive popular hits. It took several entries for people to catch on to what they brought to the table. Or take Mass Effect. It's probably the perfect example of launching a new franchise. BioWare invested years in getting the lore right. In this they drew from the fountain of RPG knowledge, especially Knights of the Old Republic, or KOTOR for short. And you can see how the first Mass Effect is basically KOTOR, but with Mass Effect's lore. It was successful, but not as big as it would later become, as new installments were released. Time was required to let the franchise grow, but the ingredients for its success were there from the beginning. Bethesda is very well positioned to invest several games in building Starfield as a franchise. Their existing franchises made enough money that they should be able to accept lower than expected financial returns on Starfield, and their acquisition by Microsoft basically means that profits shouldn't be as critical in the short term. That's assuming that the lore is there to build on, of course. Without it, releasing more installments will be pointless. One of the keys for the success of Bethesda games has been that their moddability allows people to project their own interpretation of the lore onto the games. Nobody would still be playing Skyrim or Fallout if it weren't for the thousands of mods that exist for those games. This question's already been answered though. According to Todd Howard's interview, the 1000 procedurally generated planets will be available for modding, so that's great news for the creative people out there. But there is one gotcha to keep in mind. It's one thing to extend and reinterpret existing lore, but it's entirely another to create lore from scratch. There's plenty of mods that extend on existing lore, but how many examples are there like Enderroll that create something entirely new? Not many. Most people aren't equipped to do that, and the difficulty and risk of creating something new is one reason why we tend to see the same movie franchises, book series, and derivative TV in mass media. Making modding accessible is one thing, and we know Bethesda can do that very well, so we can be confident that the tools will be there for modders to play with. The question is whether Starfield's lore will be of sufficiently high quality that people will be inspired to put in their own time into extending and reinterpreting it. Ultimately, Starfield is an attempt to create a franchise, not just a single game. As we've seen from our brief discussion, the key to Starfield's success as a franchise will rest on the quality of the lore and how much it engages fans. Bethesda is very well positioned to succeed. They've had the time to build that lore, they have the funding to give it time to grow, and they already intend to give modders the tools to be creative. The question is if that lore will be there. We have very little actual knowledge of what's in the game, but it's fair to say that that question will be the key to Starfield's success. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Feel free to leave a like, subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when new videos come out. See you soon.